Hey you guys, welcome to True Set Free, Wednesday the 22nd of July 2020. And this is Pastor Steve Winry of Calvary Chapel Tri-Cities. My name is Matt. If you guys have questions, you can email the email behind me at crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can text the number 707-872-7677. Locally, I'm just on the website here and I have a couple announcements. You guys can go to calvarytricities.org is our website. All the stuff's on there. There's a bunch of stuff going on. I'm not going to obviously cover everything, but we have a ministry conference coming up at the end of July. It's July 30th through August 1st, a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's our third one, and this would actually be a really great year to go if you guys haven't signed up for that. There's a whole bunch of speakers coming, but it's designed for people who are in ministry just to get filled. And who's the guys? Who's coming?
It's
Brett?
No, Brett Williams and then David Rosales from down in California.
So get on there. All the information's on there. Check it out. But I invite you guys to that. We also have the Father-Son Retreat coming up August 7th through the 9th. Dad, if you haven't signed up to take your kids, kind of the first public retreat that we have since our ranch got flooded. So that, yay for that. And then on August 14th, if you haven't gone, we've done an annual men's steak night. This is going to be a revised COVID version of that, but on August 14th, it's called Fight the Good Fight, and it's just our men's summer outreach. So guys, get on there, check that out, and invite all your non-believing friends. There's more on here, but that's all I'm going to go for on that. Anything else you want to say?
No. Sounds good.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about we're having a protest
on
Saturday.
Said it. He said it.
There's a protest coming up on Saturday where a bunch of churches in town want to open up, and they needed a venue to do their basically opening up protest worship / what's the word got to say about this stuff? And so we're going to do it here at Calvary in the amphitheater with overflow in the sanctuary. And so that's coming up Saturday, 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock. It's going to be warm, and so if you're going to come, dress light, and we'll have water and all that stuff here for you. So
there'll actually be food trucks here too.
Oh yeah, we got food trucks.
For you guys. And I was told a snow cone thing. I didn't confirm that though. So it's going to be an awesome thing. I'm really excited. I've been praying for about that. Just churches opening up and uniting and stuff. So that's going to be. I'm pretty excited for that. Okay, are you ready to jump into some questions here? My first one here is from Weston, and they say, on Abraham's covenant to Israel, do you see as Jacob's grandson Ephraim and Manasseh that they were given the covenant during the time of the end?
Let me see that, Weston. Do you see as Jacob's grandsons Ephraim and Manasseh that they were given the covenant during the time of the end? Weston, I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. The Abrahamic covenant was something that was given to obviously Abraham and his descendants, and it was a covenant that was not based on performance. Let me give you a quick overview. This is something that you see as you go through just about the whole latter 3/4 of the book of Genesis. You have the first part of the covenant in chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, and then chapter 13, verse 14. It's reiterated. Chapter 17, verses 4 through 8, chapter 18, verses 17 and 18, and chapter 24, verse 7. And there's a couple other places I could take you through on all that. One of the things that you have with this specifically is that it was a covenant that was not based, like I was saying, on performance. In chapter 15, you have the ratification of the covenant. God shows Abraham that he's going to keep his covenant. And Abraham asks specifically for an oath from God, a blood covenant. And so what happens is Abraham shows up in chapter 15 fully expecting that he's going to be involved in this whole thing. He sets up the sacrifice, and what they would do is they would put sacrificed animals, they would cut them in two and put the halves of the animals in a line. And the two people who were going to make the blood covenant would walk through the middle of those sacrificed animals. And the implication there is, if I don't keep my word of this covenant, then what happened to those animals should happen to me. And so that's what a blood covenant was. You see something similar when you get to the book of Exodus. God makes a blood covenant with the people of Israel. Okay, so in this instance, what happens is Abraham shows up, God makes him go to sleep, and the only one who passes through the pieces is God himself. And you see him going through as a burning torch. And so that covenant was made to Abraham and to his descendants, specifically through Isaac. And so since Jacob is the son of Isaac, and Joseph is the son of Jacob, and Ephraim and Manasseh are the sons of Joseph, then yeah, they're in the line of that covenant. And the reason I'm making the point that it's an unconditional covenant is because people have this, there's this frankly false doctrine that goes around that Israel has been abandoned by God.
Yeah.
And it's not true. The very first covenant that was given to Israel was given to them on the basis not of what Israel would do, but of what God would do. Now, I mentioned the Mosaic covenant, and in the Mosaic covenant, what happens in that one is there's blood sprinkled on the altar, actually on the Ark of the Covenant. There's also blood sprinkled on the people of Israel. And so that's a blood covenant that requires obedience from both parties. And when Israel breaks the covenant, almost immediately in the situation with the golden calf, what God tells Moses is, I'm going to kill these people. That's part of a blood covenant. They didn't keep the covenant, and so the penalty is death. What God says to them to Moses is, I'm going to kill these people, and I'm going to start over with you. And Moses does two things when he's speaking to God on that. He talks about the fact that that would undercut the glory of God, that the Egyptians would mock the Lord on that basis. And then what Moses does is he brings up the Abrahamic covenant. You made a covenant to their forefathers. And the point that he's making is, we still have a covenant with you, Father, based on your performance and not ours. And so it's at that point that God retreats to his grace in that situation. And it's all designed. What God's doing is putting Moses in the position of an intercessor. But the reason that Israel even started in the book of Exodus is because of the Abrahamic covenant. And so that continues all the way down through the end times. So yes, Ephraim and Manasseh are involved in that whole thing.
All right.
And hopefully I covered what you were asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're watching and you want clarification, you can post it on there. I'll try to get back to it. All right, my next question comes from Renee. She says, I came out of the Catholic Church when I got saved in 1981. I was reading Hal Lindsey's book, Countdown to Armageddon. Throughout the years, many teachers think, like Hal, that the Pope is going to be the Antichrist. I believe the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church is definitely part of the last day prophecy. I feel he would be perfect as the false prophet, but the Antichrist must be a Jew. He will sign a peace treaty with Israel and allow sacrificing in the temple. Your thoughts on that scenario?
I don't have any disagreements there. I don't know that the Pope would be the false prophet. I don't know that for sure. But when you're looking at what the Bible has to say about this whole thing, there's a union between a false religion and the Antichrist himself. And so you have that. One of the problems that I have with some Protestant interpretations of the whore of Babylon out of Revelation chapter 17 is that they confine it to the Roman Catholic Church. And the problem with that is that this is going to be a worldwide religion. It's not going to be something that's just focused on one sect of Christianity. And so from my perspective, being a Protestant or coming out, well, I didn't come out of Protestantism. I came out of a non-Christian family, but I've always been part of the Protestant church. And so one of my problems with that is that when I look at the Protestant church versus the Roman Catholic Church, for example, it's at the very least an even up on who's the most out to lunch. And actually, I think that much of the Protestant church is in worse shape than the Roman Catholic Church is. At least the Roman Catholic Church understands that abortion is wrong. At least the Roman Catholic Church understands that fornication is wrong and homosexuality is wrong and those kind of things. We have major denominations in the Protestant church that condone those things and even promote them. And so there is a real abandonment of biblical truth. And then on top of that, you have to be able to bring in all the other world religions. So you got to be looking at Islam. You got to be looking at Buddhism. You got to be, when you're talking about the final world religion, it's not going to be something that's just focused on Christianity. Christianity is going to be involved in that, but it can't just be focused on Christianity. So, like you said, I think that false prophet, that could be, with a pope, and the pope may, have enough influence to be able to influence those other religions, or it could be a New Age teacher, or it could be, a Buddhist, or but in any case, it's going to be someone that is involved in that final one world religion and draws everybody back together. One of the things that I really like to emphasize with this, and that's been the point of everything that I've said to you, is that this is bigger than just Christianity. It's bigger than the outward form of Christianity. It's a world religion, and so you got to be thinking in those kinds of terms when you're talking about the Antichrist and the false church.
The Antichrist has to be a Jew?
I don't see a way out of that one. If he's going to be a false Messiah, then Jews aren't going to go for anybody who's not Jewish.
Right.
And so I am of the opinion that yes, it would have to be a Jew.
What about that reference? What do you think of that reference about him being the Assyrian?
I think that has to do with, actually, it's not just the Assyrian, it's a Babylonian, mm-hmm. It's the
world system.
Yeah, well, when you're looking at the fall of Satan, Isaiah chapter 14, where it talks about mm-hmm. the king of Babylon,
yep.
And then in Ezekiel chapter 28, where it talks about the king of Tyre,
yep.
And then you get to the book of Daniel. There's a Greek aspect to this, and there's a Roman aspect to this, and then, like you said, there's an Assyrian aspect to this. And I think all of those things, come into play with this whole thing. And so, I'm not exactly sure how God's going to put that all together. I could see the Babylonian and the Assyrian. Those would be two areas specifically that kind of conjoin. And so there's a Mesopotamian aspect to that. And then when you're looking at Tyre, that actually goes on with the Grecian aspect of it, because Tyre was, when you're looking at the Philistines and the influence from the sea peoples, they were probably Grecian peoples that came over and stuff. And so there's some things in there that are interesting. I think it has to do with all the previous kingdoms, basically, that came before, and there's going to be aspects to that in his, what would you call it, his career,
Right.
Yeah. So
okay.
I don't know how that all works.
Not Trump.
No, not Trump. The best American candidate that I ever had for the Antichrist was Jimmy Carter, and it was when I was in high school. It was during the elections, and it was in 1975, 1976, and he had a campaign poster that had him with a beard on, and it said underneath it, "JC can save." And when I saw that, I was like, it's this guy's got to be the Antichrist.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I went asking all my Christian friends if that was the case. I'd been a believer for about a year at that time. So.
All right, Milliam is on here, Pastor Steve, and says, where you at? Why does God allow Satan into heaven? God threw Satan out once, so why can Satan go back?
It's Milliam?
Yeah.
Okay, Milliam. I don't know why God does anything with this guy when you get right down to it. I think that when you look at the whole counsel of what Scripture has to say, God puts up with this guy for a very long time. In Revelation chapter 12, you see frustration in heaven, specifically with the angels, and the frustration you can tell is there. Because when Satan is finally and completely cast out, there's rejoicing in heaven. And let me read you the passage. It says, so the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and that they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell on them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. And you correctly understood that to be something that hasn't taken place yet. This is something that takes place probably at the halfway point of the tribulation period. And so, obviously, what's happening with Satan in heaven is there are these accusations that are going on with Satan over the people of God, and that's something that you also see in the book of Job. And so the only thing that I can see, the only answer that I can really give you to that is that what God is allowing is an adversary, so that people have to make a choice. So that they have to come down on one side or another, whether you're talking about angels or whether you're talking about humanity. Everybody makes a choice between serving God and not serving God, which ends up being serving Satan. And so he's a foil in that sense, or he's a tool of God in that sense, to bring people to the point where they have to make a decision. And so, I don't know a whole lot of other reasons for that, except for that specifically. When you get down to the tribulation period, one of the things that you have in the book of Revelation is the fact that this is the end. This is when all of humanity is finally making a choice, and so you've got some different dynamics that are taking place. And so again, you have this situation with God casting Satan out completely at that point, and then he goes down to the earth. And the last half of the tribulation is one of the most horrendous times in human history, whether you're talking about the judgments of God coming down on humanity, or whether you're talking about the evil that Satan promotes during that period of time through the Antichrist. So
that's the craziest thing to me about the end of the millennium, is that Satan gets released, and people who lived in a situation where Christ is governing end up turning, just like we did in the beginning.
Right.
Even though
we talked about that last week on Wednesday night, and when Satan's cast down to the earth, that's not the final act on this guy. He obviously continues for 3.5 years during the tribulation period, but then in Revelation chapter 20, it says that he's bound for 1,000 years while Christ reigns on the earth for that period of time. At the end of that time, he's released again, and it's specifically, he's released to tempt those who were born during that time, who've never been given an opportunity to choose between Jesus and between the enemy. And like you said, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect environment, perfect righteousness, perfect king, everything's perfect, and then mankind still rebels. And like we were talking about last week, I think that's that is an object lesson on the sinfulness of humanity. As if we need one. You know, you have the God of the universe coming down in human form, like literally never doing anything wrong, and we killed him.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hang him on a cross. Yeah, that's fallen humanity. That's, it's tweaked. So,
All right, Joe is on here, Pastor Steve, and says, what is the biblical approach to dealing with bitterness? And then should we keep serving if we're struggling with bitterness with our brethren?
you know, Joe, the biblical approach to bitterness has to, it's always got to do with the whole issue of forgiveness. You remember in Matthew chapter 18 where Jesus is talking about problems between brothers, and he says if your brother sins against you, go talk to him, you and him alone, and if he repents, then you're to forgive him. If he hears you, you've gained your brother, he says. If he doesn't, then you take 2 or 3 people with you so that every word can be established. Because maybe you're wrong, maybe he's wrong. And it's the idea of people hearing you both out when you're talking about this issue. And then if he doesn't repent, then you're to take it to the church. And if he doesn't hear the church, then he's to be treated like a tax collector and an unbeliever. It's at that point that Peter says, how often do I have to forgive people? And he gives Jesus a number. And it's actually a pretty good number. It's twice what the Pharisees said. Pharisees said, 3 strikes, you're out. They taught that you only had to forgive somebody 3 times. And what Peter did was he doubled that and added 1, and then you get the perfect number 7. How many times should I forgive somebody? Up to 7 times. And Jesus says, no. And, it's up to 70 times 7. And that doesn't mean that you count 490 times and then you're off the hook. It's just talking about the fact that your forgiveness is not something that should be limited. And when you look in the passage at the parable that Jesus gives on forgiving people, what's cool about it is that he lays this whole thing out so that I get my eyes off their offense, to me, and I get my eyes on the forgiveness of God towards me. And so, you know the story, and well, hopefully you know the story. If you don't know the story, go and read it in Matthew 18. But basically, short version is there's a guy who is in debt to a king, and the king calls him to account, and it turns out that he owes him 10,000 talents. And it doesn't tell you talents of what. It could be talents of silver, talents of gold. But if you're talking about 10,000 talents, a talent was about 75 pounds, anywhere from 75 to 100 pounds. And actually 225 pounds. But if you're talking about talents, that's what it is. And then if you're talking about gold, you're talking about 75 pounds of gold at that point. And
it's Joe Hoff Grandview, just FYI.
Oh, okay. You're talking about 75 pounds of gold, and so that's for 1 talent, and then you multiply that times 10,000. You're talking about billions upon billions upon billions of dollars is what this guy owes. And then he goes before the king and says, forgive me and I'll repay you all of it, which is nonsense. If you spent that much money and you lost it, there's no way you're ever getting it back. And so it's just nonsense. So the king forgives him, and then he goes out and finds a servant who owes him 100 denarii. And a denarius was a day's wage. So you're talking about 100 days' wages in that instance. And I like that because it's not insignificant. Because if you call a day's wage $100 and you multiply that times 100, you're talking about $10,000. And if you owe me $10,000, I need it, and I want you to give it to me. And I would like it now, thank you. And so one of the cool things about that is that when Jesus is talking about this whole issue of forgiveness, he's not telling you that what you owed to God was billions upon billions, and what I owe, what Matt owed to me is $2. It's not $2. it's $10,000, which may not be significant to somebody who has billions, but it's significant to me who has very little. And so I want the $10,000. And so what God's saying is that the offenses against you are not insignificant, and that he recognizes those things. But they are insignificant in comparison with what God's forgiven me. And so, that's the deal with the bitterness. You got to get your eyes off the things that people have done to you, and you have to get your eyes onto what you have done to God. And that is another whole exercise in itself. You remember the feast that Jesus went to. He went to a dinner with a Pharisee. The Pharisee's name was Simon. And while he was at the dinner, a woman came up and began weeping on his feet. And when the tears hit his feet, she began wiping it off with her hair. And Simon the Pharisee said in his heart, if this guy was a prophet talking about Jesus, he would know what kind of woman this is. And then Jesus gave a little parable again about debt. And then he said, to whom much is when somebody is forgiven much, they love much. When they're forgiven little, they love little. And that was Simon's problem. And that was the woman's strength. She knew how much Jesus was willing to forgive her. And so there was much love in connection with that. And I think that a lot of times with us as believers, we can start believing our own PR and thinking about how nice we really are. When in reality, we need to have a good understanding of what God's forgiven us for. And so when I compare myself, when I compare Matt's sins against me to what I've done to God or what I've done to other people, it's insignificant because I know all the stuff that I've done, and you need to go through that. And so your love for Christ becomes deeper when you recognize all the sin that you've committed, and your forgiveness for other people becomes easier when you compare their debt to you to your debt to God. And that's how you get out of it. That's how you have to think about this stuff. There's a passage in Titus chapter 3 that admittedly is, it's talking about unbelievers, but still it's a good kind of rule of thumb for dealing with people. In the passage it says that we need to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work. Then it says to speak evil of no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing all humility to all men, for we ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. But when the kindness and the love of God our Savior toward man appeared, not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to his mercy he saved us through the washing of regeneration and renewing of the Holy Spirit. There's a point in my life where I was complaining to God about a guy who was abusing me. He was abusing my time. He was just self-centered. And I was complaining to God about him. And basically what God did was he used this passage to say to me, Steve, you were no different than he was. And the only difference between you and him is me, is Jesus. And so, again, it's something to keep in mind, and it really helps me on dealing with that kind of stuff with people.
So one thing I noticed about in the church, and obviously, you hit the heart of the issue, is that you just act like a believer and you don't do what the world does, bringing it into church. But one of the things that is probably most popular when it comes up to bitterness is people wanting the respect or position or ministry or chance or opportunity that somebody else gets, And so they get bitter and resentful towards that person because they think that they are deserving of that position.
Yeah.
Obviously, that fixes the whole issue if you're just doing it that way. But one of the things that you said during a Bible study a long time ago is that you just serve the Lord and you let him put you in those positions. And that's kind of what I always did. And what I notice is that if those people were supposed to be there, then that's great. And if they weren't, or if you did get taken advantage of, they end up going away, and God will put you where you're supposed to be if you just let him do it.
Yeah.
And do those passages that you just read.
Yeah,
and it just
exactly.
takes care of itself. God takes care of it.
Yeah, God, a lot of times when we're looking at the issues that we deal with, we're leaving God out. And so, I've been in positions where I've been belittled and people have done things to me, and God was not unaware of those things. And he always took care of it. He always takes care of it. So Philippians chapter 1 at the end of the chapter, 2 at the beginning of the chapter, says that what we're supposed to be doing is esteeming others better than ourselves. And so that takes out ambition. Nothing's to be done through selfish ambition or vainglory, is what it says in the passage, but esteem others better than yourself. And so I'm supposed to be esteeming others better than myself. In another passage, it talks about rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. I've rejoiced with people a lot of times who got things that I really wanted. And, it's like, God did it for them. Mm-hmm. And so I can shut my mouth and just be kind to them and rejoice over it. And so, it's like, that's the deal. Ultimately, my life is in God's hands. And he's going to put me in the places where he wants me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed that too when you look at, like anybody, David or Abraham or whatever, they're just, not Abraham, but David, he's just hanging out with the sheep, loving the Lord, and he removes them from that nobody environment and puts them where he wants them.
There's a passage in Psalm 75, it says, exaltation comes neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but God is the judge. He puts down one and exalts another.
Awesome. All right, my next question is from, where are you at? Nick, and he says, is there a reason 2 Peter chapter 2 and the book of Jude are so similar? He says they reference the same passages in practically the same order. Is there more to the backstory for these two books?
Well, one of the things that, and you're right, there's some real similarities there. One of the things that commentators do and theologians do is they try to make the point that one is dependent upon the other, and I don't know that that's necessarily something that needs to happen in the passage. I think that both these guys are sharp enough to be able to come up with a lot of this stuff on their own. That doesn't mean that they weren't influenced by each other. There's a possibility, and so one may have written after the other. Obviously, they didn't write these things simultaneously, but you could have Peter quoting from Jude, or you could have Jude quoting from Peter, and using it in the same kind of context. And it is a similar context. And if it does, then okay. But again, I don't know any of that. I don't know that that's what happened. I do know that they are similar passages speaking about similar things. So.
I'm doing a lot of that with just textual criticism and their ideas of why that was written. A lot of it is just speculation. But like the other day, just the idea of hanging out as brothers in the Lord and stuff like that. The other day I said something to Matt Kessie, and we were talking about a certain thing. We go into the other room, and Mitch says the exact same thing to him.
Yeah.
And it was just because we had the same thought on it.
Right.
I know that those are pretty precise, but,
yeah.
Okay. My next question is from Isaac, and he says, in 1 Corinthians 14, 13 through 15, it seems as though it's possible to not only be the one speaking in tongues, but also able to interpret it yourself. Is this what that is saying?
Yes.
So you can speak in tongues
yeah.
and interpret.
Well, it's the point that Paul makes in the passage. He says, therefore, let him who speaks in a tongue pray that he may interpret. And then he talks about my spirit praying. So yeah, you can do that. In fact, I had a good friend of mine who, whenever he would speak in tongues, that's exactly what he would do. He would speak in tongues, and then almost immediately he himself would give the interpretation. And the first time I heard it, I thought that was kind of weird, because usually, you wait
Right.
around for a little bit to see if anybody gets the interpretation. But he did it. It wasn't something that I was used to, And then he interpreted it, and after I thought about it for just a couple of seconds, I realized that, yeah, that's exactly what 1 Corinthians 14:13 says. So, yep, that's what it says.
All right, Danny's on here, and he asks about the gap theory. And he didn't say this, so not to put words in his mouth, but I thought I saw him on another post asking about you teaching the other day and confirming the gap theory as agreeing with it. So, in a nutshell, what is the gap theory, and do you hold to that view?
The gap theory is the idea that in between Genesis 1 and 2, that there was another creation. Well, Genesis 1 is about an original creation, and that between 1 and 2, there was a destruction of the original creation, and then a recreation by God. And what's his name again?
Danny.
Danny?
Danny Kluver.
Okay. Danny, the deal with that is the gap theory was something that was brought in actually in the early 1900s to try to explain away dinosaurs and long ages for the earth. The idea behind it being this, it says in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Hebrew allows that to say, and the earth became without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And so that's because Hebrew is kind of vague. And so you're allowed to do that in that context. But there's just like literally no passage in the Bible that speaks to this. There's nothing that says that this is what was going on. And again, it's something that was used specifically to try to explain away dinosaurs and an old age for the earth. There is a passage in the book of Jeremiah that talks about the earth being without form and void, and it uses the same language that's here. It's tohu vabohu in Hebrew. And the problem with that is that that's a tribulation passage. It's a end times passage. And it talks about the destruction that takes place during the end times, and specifically the destructions of the cities of man. And so, again, you have that. Obviously, I don't hold to that. And it's something that I used when I was a younger Christian to try to explain the whole evolution thing, because you know that I was a convinced evolutionist when I became a Christian. And so when I read this passage, obviously you got a 6-day creation, and in the gap theory, it's a 6-day recreation. And so they would put the fall of Satan during the previous creation. The problem with that is when you get to the end of this creation, after the 6th day, it says in verse 31, it says, then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the 6th day. Well, if that's the case, then what about all the dead animals that are in the earth? Because that's what they're trying to explain away. What about all the dead fossils that are in the earth, or the destruction of a whole creation and the fall of Satan at that point? Those aren't good. And so it doesn't look like it really fits in there with me. And when you're talking about dealing with the old age of the earth and that kind of stuff, there are good answers for that. So, for example, when you're talking about the age of man, you realize that most of the history of mankind that you read about in a textbook has no history. It doesn't exist. Most of the history of mankind is something that's literally a story that's been made up, because in actuality we only have about 4,000 to 5,000 years of history, and 5,000 is pushing it to the exact to the far end of the scale. So we only have about that much history where you can actually go pick up fragments of civilizations that and writings and those kinds of things. And when you're talking about the history of modern man, it's well over 200,000 years. And so, one of my favorite things to say about that is, so Like seriously, for 195,000 years, all of humanity collectively was picking their nose, just going around grunting and doing nothing for 195,000 years. And then 5,000 years ago, everybody decides to write a book and build a city and start farming. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. And that's how all of evolution, basically goes. You have long periods of time where, it's just a bunch of stuff. There's over 90% of the geochronometers, and what I mean by that is ways that you can measure the age of the Earth. Over 90% of them give relatively young ages for the Earth. There's a very few, and specifically radiometric dating is one of the few. It's why it's always pointed to, is the only one that, where you can get the long ages that you need for evolution. And turns out that's not even long enough to get evolution by chance over time. And so, again, the gap theory is something that I went through at one point, but it's been a long time since I've held on to anything like that. In fact, it was long before I came up to the Tri-Cities. So.
Okay, my next question says if your preteen begins to rebel and not want to come to church, do you make them go?
My teens and preteens lived in my house, and church is what we do. And so, yeah.
Would you put an age on that, like 18, they're an adult, or if they're living with you at any time, they go to church?
Basically, in my home, it was, you're living with me, this is what we do. And so you're my son, you're my daughter, this is what we do. Mm. So, yeah.
And if someone, the counter argument of, well, you're forcing them in a relationship with God versus their own free will and going,
yeah.
You see that going to church and actually hearing the word.
I'm also forcing them to go to work. I'm forcing them to
right.
make their bed. I'm forcing them to clean their room. There's a lot of things I'm forcing them to do.
Yeah.
And so, in actuality, you can do both things at the same time. And I've never had a problem with doing that. And, again, my family has not been without problems. But I didn't just allow those to go on in my home. And so there has to be some kickback against wickedness. There has to be some kickback against compromise. You have to push against the evil. Otherwise, evil always wins. When you just lay back and not do anything. And so again, you're asking me the question. That's what I did. It's like my kids went to church with us. And so, when there were other things that were going on, I wasn't unreasonable. They didn't have to be at every single service that we did every week and that kind of thing, but they did need to be going to church if they were in my home. So.
All right. My next one is, if God was walking in the garden, does that mean it was the pre-incarnate Jesus?
Yeah, in John chapter 1, verse 18, it says, no man has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son is the one who reveals him. And so Jesus has always been the revealer of who the Father is. And that's the point that John is making in that passage. And again, that's John chapter 1, verse 18. So yeah, I believe that was Jesus in the garden, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Yeah. All right, you got ahead of me, so I'll put it up here afterwards. Okay. Someone sent me, I just popped in my head, someone tagged me on Facebook and asked you to comment on your thoughts on the church that grabbed Gandalf's staff and decided to, what did they, cast out the spirit of racism for their church or something like that?
Cast out the spirit of racism from their church.
Yeah, they wanted your thoughts on that situation.
It's one of my favorite videos ever.
Google this.
I just sat there and laughed. And, Christians do some of the silliest things. and think that they're spiritual doing them. And the point of this is that what was happening was there was a lady, they're up front and they're gonna do something about racism in the church, and I only watched it once, but it seemed to me that it was racism in their church, and so a lady came up, and she was a Lord of the Rings fan, and she lets you know in the video that she's a Lord of the Rings fan, and she decided to take a cue from the scene where Gandalf is standing on the bridge of, I think it's Khazad-dûm.
Yeah.
And is it? How do you know this?
Because I'm a Lord of the Rings fan.
Okay. Standing on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, and the Balrog, which is a big demon type of thing, is coming after him. And all the orcs are running away, and he takes his staff and he pounds it on the bridge, and he says, "You shall not pass." And he keeps coming, and he pounds it on the bridge again, and he says, "You shall not pass." And then he pounds it a third time, both hands, "You shall not pass." And the bridge breaks, and the Balrog goes down, and then he takes his whip and lashes onto Gandalf's leg, and he goes down too. Last words of Gandalf are, "Fly, you fools." So I like the movie too. But it is silly to take that and bring it to church. That is just silliness. And so basically what happened was they're all on the stage, and this young lady found a staff someplace that she thought looked like Gandalf's staff, and had everybody on the stage put their hands on this dumb stick and pound it up and down, saying, "You shall not pass." And so the spirit of racism, which there is no such thing as the spirit of racism. The Bible never blames this stuff on demons. And so there's no spirit of fornication, there's no spirit of adultery, there's no spirit of, I don't know, whatever, of cussing. There's no spirit of these things. The Bible never teaches that. What the Bible teaches is that's your flesh. And so racism is your flesh also. And it doesn't mean that Satan doesn't like to inflame those things, but when the Bible is condemning our sin, it never condemns the devil. It condemns our sin. And so if you want to get out of sin, you're going to have to take care of yourself and stop blaming it on the devil. And those are my thoughts on that. Just silliness. I have this standard. If I can't bring one of my construction buddies to church and not have him laugh in the back over things that are silly being done up front, you don't want that. And so it's my construction standard. Whatever you're doing up front needs to, not be silly and not be corny. If an unbeliever wants to laugh at you, they should be laughing at you because of the gospel. They should be laughing at you because of the truth of the Word of God and the fact that they're in unbelief. It should be a judgment on them, not an indictment of you. And an unbeliever sitting in the back of that church looking at these silly people holding on to a stupid staff and repeating lines from a movie. The guy sitting in the back of a church watching that has every right to laugh at them.
Yeah.
And there's no judgment on him. It's all judgment on the people up front. Just silliness. And so I just don't know people in the world who would go for this. Most of the people that I've ever known that would ever go through, go for that kind of nonsense are people who grew up in church. And so, it's not attractive at all. It's not cute. So.
All right.
But it is funny, and it's one of my favorite videos. So.
I pasted the whole thing on there. It's gonna be too long, so I'll chop it up. But my next question is this: If or when law and order goes away, if the Constitution becomes so disregarded that it doesn't abide anymore, what do American Christians submit to in regards to government or governing authorities or those who are in various forms of power?
You know what? That's something that we're going to have to work through, because I don't know at that point. I think that if we get in a situation like that, if there is not a civil war, then there's going to have to be another form of government that's put in place. And so, it's going to be whatever, the people vote on at that point, or, whatever, people come up with. But again, when we look at our walk with God, obviously our walk with God, number one, is with God. And so our submission is to God first, and then everybody else after that. Doing an if-then statement on that can get us in all kinds of places. I love end of the world movies. And so this is, it could be like Mad Max. It could be like The Postman, or it could
Ooh,
be.
there's an old school movie.
Yeah, it could be all kinds of stuff. And at that point, you're looking at a situation where you've got chaos and anarchy, and you're going to have feudalism and that kind of stuff. And so you're going to have to pick and choose who you're going to submit to at that point. It's going to be the one who is protecting you. So,
in that scenario, though, obviously the Constitution being the law of the land based off of our form of government, if they don't change that and it just becomes a free-for-all because of the crazy ruling they're doing as far as disregard for just basic laws that we have, and everyone, like in the book of Judges, doing what's right in his own eyes, if it gets to that point, is that what you see? That you just have a whole society, just French Revolution, chaos type of scenario?
That's what always, that's history.
Yeah.
That's exactly what goes on in those situations. People just do a free-for-all. And so that's not something you want to be looking forward to.
No.
And I believe that on both ends of that spectrum.
What do you mean?
Well, it's like a lot of these guys are going around, they want anarchy, and they want the cops to be gone and that kind of stuff. Well, the only thing that's protecting bad guys from good guys who want to shoot them is the cops. We all restrain ourselves because of the fact that we've got law and order. And so generally speaking, when we're thinking about cops are gone, we're thinking about, people, people who are law-abiding are going to be preyed upon. Well, that's questionable, because, every time something like this goes on, more people go out and buy guns. And so, you have the situation with that couple in Missouri, in St. Louis, who are standing out front waving their guns around. That lady was scared. She had no muzzle control.
Yeah.
And so they're out waving their guns around, and you want to have that in every single situation, and the cops never come. And what you're going to have is a lot of people getting shot. And so the whole idea, a lot of times anarchists think that they're all hot stuff, when they're out doing this stuff. And all I can think of is what happens when all the crazy gun guys, don't have anything holding them back. What happens when that takes place? So you're going to have this from both ends of the whole thing. Cops are good. It's good to have law enforcement.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've thought about that for sure, but then, you have like the Wild West, because if you don't have enough marshals to do law and order, then the citizens just do it themselves.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that can get scary. There's a reason that we have a court system and that kind of thing. So.
All right, last one for today's show. Where do people who are born in the millennium go when they die?
I don't know. So I'll tell you what I think. I think that it may be a situation where they're resurrected immediately. I'll give you a couple options here. It may be a situation where they die, and if they're a believer, immediately they're resurrected, because the Bible talks about the fact that the place that believers dwell is in the New Jerusalem. It's a place that Christ prepared for us. There are some commentators, and I don't know this for sure, but I think it might be an option. There's some commentators that think that the New Jerusalem actually orbits the earth, during the tribulation period, and that we're those who have been resurrected in the rapture and at the end of the tribulation go back and forth to the New Jerusalem.
When you say orbit, do you mean that it comes around
Yeah.
the New Jerusalem? It doesn't go with it?
No, the earth is here, and New Jerusalem is
Floating
orbiting
around
the
it.
earth.
Okay. Uh-huh.
You know, and it could be orbiting at 22,000 miles, and so it would be in one spot. But you know, they think that it would be orbiting the earth. Well, if that's the case, and a believer dies during the millennium, then you know that's the dwelling place of believers, and they'd be in the New Jerusalem. And so you know, they die one day and they're back glorified the next day. And so that would be cool.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't know that for sure. One of the things that I didn't talk about, we talked about the Great White Throne Judgment last Wednesday. And by the way, that's a really insightful question. I think it's insightful because I had the same question. But when you look at the Great White Throne Judgment, it looks like there's a possibility that people are judged to be righteous. So it says, I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which was the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the book. Then it goes on and it says down in verse 15, and anyone not found written in the book of life was cast in the lake of fire. So that leaves it open for someone may have been found written in the book of life. And so if that's the case, then I would think that those would be millennium saints. And at that point, then you have a resurrection of these guys at the same time as the resurrection of the unrighteous dead. So one of those two.
All right. All right, we're out of time for today. If you guys have questions, email crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can leave voicemail text to 707-872-7677. I saw, who was that? I think Billy or something put on here, happy birthday to Steve. Billy Killian did. This guy's birthday today, so happy birthday to Pastor Steve. And then if you guys that are local, get on our website. You can see all the events going on. Steve already mentioned the protest that's going on this Saturday for religious liberty and churches opening. Starts at 10 o'clock in our outdoor amphitheater. We have a ministry conference coming up, which is at the end of this month, July 30th, 31st, and August 1st. And then we have a father-son retreat coming up at our ranch as well. And then I also mentioned the men's Fight the Good Fight, just a men's summer outreach that we're going to be doing as well. So there's more on there. Get on there, check it out. We're constantly posting updates on there. If you don't have a church or you want to join us for church sometime, we have a 8 o'clock and 10:30 Sunday morning service in our outdoor amphitheater. We have a 6:30 Wednesday and Sunday night service as well. And if you still don't want to come, we have all of our services online, Facebook Live and YouTube Live, that you guys can check us out as well. So God bless. We will see you guys next week, True Set Free, at 3:30 on Wednesday. God bless, guys.
God bless you.